Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, please note that this event will be recorded. This is called the Biohubx Expert Corner, and I am very excited about today's guest. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Biohub. It is a not-for-profit that provides mentorship, resources, and a space to support growing health ventures. It is igniting the life sciences ecosystem in Alberta, and we love featuring the incredible talent and game-changing ventures in our Biohub community, including our guest today, Bob Shepard. Welcome, Bob.
Oh, thank you, Crystal. It's great to be here.
So let's get started. I've got so many questions for you, and then I believe we have some time to open up questions to the audience, and they are welcome to ask those questions in the chat at any point throughout the morning session. So to get us started, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you started Syantra?
Yeah, so this is a story that has about a decade's worth of history. When we were at the university in the lab there, we always kind of had an idea to translate some of the research that was going on. And I was working in Tina Rinker's lab at the time. So that was a bioengineering lab focused on cell and tissue work. And really the focus for most of the history of her lab here in Calgary had been on cardiovascular disease, heart disease. And we had an opportunity in 2011 with some visitors from South Korea to actually look at a project in breast cancer. And that was something we hadn't really considered before. But when the opportunity came to be, we said, yes, that would be really neat to do. And there was some funding available for that, which certainly didn't help with the attractiveness of the project. But once we got into it, we found out that a lot of the mechanisms of disease that we had seen in cardiovascular were actually applicable in cancer. So as we dove more into this, we were able to build out the team in the lab and really kind of move that forward. And within about a year, we realized that we were onto something a bit different. And at that time, we really started to think about, well, how could we commercialize this down the line and really begin to make an impact on patients? And so once that idea kind of took root in our brains, it really became a focus of the work. So from that point on, we started to think about what would a product look like and how could we deliver that product to the market? And so the history of Syantra over that 10 years really was an evolution from almost a concept on the research side to an idea of now we have a way to actually build a business out of this. And it was fun, right, to think about things in a little bit of a different way. So how would you actually use the science that's happening in the lab as a product or as a test that could affect patients?
Wow, I always love overnight successes that are actually taking decades of research behind them. So really cool start. And can you tell us a little bit about your feature product or your first product to market?
Yeah, for sure. So that research that we had started was really originally kind of geared towards finding ways to measure the risk of progression of breast cancer. That was an area that was actually kind of crowded at the time. And I think that when we looked at it and said, we should probably do something different, maybe there's another way we can contribute to this. It was a good move because actually there are lots of tests available currently that look at either individual risk for breast cancer even being generated, or if you happen to be a patient, what does your risk for progression profile look like? So what we did was we said, okay, how do we take what we've done and do something different? And when we made that pivot in the lab, we found that, we think we can actually detect the presence of breast cancer. So that became the focus. And now what we have is actually a blood assay that has a signature for active breast cancer. So not a risk of developing disease, but an actual indicator of the presence or absence of breast cancer. And so what we're doing is taking a very small 2.5 milliliter blood sample. It goes into a tube that we've worked with Becton Dickinson to access. It's a tube they already had on the market, but now we specify that tube for our test. And then that blood sample comes back to our lab and we process it and return a report. And we process things under a physician requisition. So a patient who wants the test goes to their doctor, gets a requisition, the sample gets drawn, it comes to us. We process the sample and then return that report that says positive or negative for that breast cancer signature.
I just always love talking to founders and specialists like yourself, and you answer that question so matter of factly. But it's I always have to take a moment and think about how incredible and game changing this is, and the kinds of lives that you will save and support, especially women who are at high risk for breast cancer. So that's absolutely incredible. And I know you're talking about the lab. Can you tell me more about the space? Because I know you are part of the Biohub community physically, but how else has the Biohub supported Syantra and its growth?
Well, so full disclosure, I'm actually a co-founder of Biohub, and we really wanted to create an organization not only to provide space, but also to provide information back to the community. So it's kind of a long story, so I'll try to summarize here in a way that's easy to follow. As we came through that whole decade of, okay, now we have something that we want to turn into a product, and we kind of knew what the product needed to be, you reach a point where you have to figure out, well, how are you going to deliver the product? And part of that for Syantra was, what's the commercial space look like? What are the characteristics of that space that we need to be able to define and then occupy? And honestly, when we looked around Calgary, I mean, we're dealing with human samples, human fluid samples, so blood. It's a biosafety level 2 substance. So you have to have a lab that meets those biosafety level 2 requirements. And when you look around Calgary for commercial biosafety level 2 space, you really don't find very much. There are a few companies that operated their own facilities. So some of the conversations that we had in the early days were, hey, could we carve out a bit of what you guys have and make a space for ourselves over there? And, sometimes the answer was, yeah, that could work. And other times it was, no, that really wouldn't work. But none of it was a long-term solution. So we started thinking about where we would eventually land to be commercial, probably 2014. And the concept of creating a new group, a new infrastructure, kind of under this Biohub banner where it could be shared, not just for university-based startups or small businesses that were in the Calgary ecosystem, but also for larger companies that might want to come and have a presence in the city. And that's where the Biohub concept came from. So what we were able to do, and this was actually during the pandemic, so it was an interesting time to be kind of launching Biohub, but we were able to find a space here in Northwest Calgary that had previously been a clinical laboratory, and then partner with our collaborators at Dynalife Medical Labs to secure the necessary access to the space. And then it was really, how do we set it up so that companies like Syantra can thrive in that space? And we were in a position to be kind of the test case. And that's sort of how this has all evolved. So now we have a facility where, companies can come in, have the overall infrastructure that they need that's kind of provided by Biohub, so you can focus on your own business and your own service or product. We can lock off space so it can get the necessary accreditation. And the great thing is it's all biosafety level 2. So it has the infrastructure required to let us do the work that we need to do with those human samples.
So you have more than just space, but you mentioned the community, the support, the resources that are needed. And not only did Syantra need that, and so you built it so that you could advance your own company, but you've opened the doors and welcomed other life sciences companies. I know Nanotest, many others are in that space, sharing not only the resources, but also just the learnings and sometimes the challenges that you go through when starting a company. So the value must be really high and above and beyond space. And so let's go back to Syantra a bit. I wanted to get into some of the technicalities, starting with, in simple terms, can we talk about what exactly does a biomarker mean?
Yeah, for sure. So, biomarkers are just usually proteins or maybe gene expression products or even, other hormones or indicators of your overall health that are in your body. So, by identifying different substances that are related to either health or disease, they can now come together in a way to provide an indicator. So a good example for men is PSA. Other ones would be cholesterol. For instance, if you think you've had a heart attack also and you go to the hospital, one of the things they look for is your troponin levels. So all of those things are biomarkers that would be indicative of something that's not quite right. For what we're doing with breast cancer, it's not quite that straightforward, because breast cancer and all cancers really are more silent in the early stages. So the challenge with this was to kind of find, and in our case, it's gene expression, not proteins, but to find those biomarkers, those compounds or those molecules that we could then identify that have a relationship to either health or disease. And so that's the things that we actually measure to give us the indication of whether or not breast cancer is present.
So we can now detect it through these biomarkers, but up until this point, and even now, people use mammography and other more classic diagnostic procedures. Why is Syantra important, and why would what's the problem with today's diagnostic process?
So the whole idea of using molecular biomarkers to detect disease has been around for a long time. For indications such as breast cancer, it's complicated. So the tools have really just become available recently to make this feasible. When you're thinking about a mammogram, that's an image. So it's an X-ray image of a breast. So works really well as long as there's a clear field of vision, so that you can see any abnormalities in that anatomical structure. What we found over the years is, though, mammograms can have some challenges for particular groups. So younger women generally don't qualify for mammograms under health programs. And women with dense breast tissue have challenges with mammograms as well, because the density of the tissue can sometimes mask the appearance of the cancer. Because really what you're looking at is an image, and dense tissue shows up white on a mammogram just like a cancer would. So if you have a lot of dense tissue present in the breast, and it happens to be in an area where there may be a cancer growing, it can be hard to distinguish the difference between the tissue and the cancer. So we know that early detection is important for achieving good outcomes in breast cancer and all cancers. So having a molecular method that's not an image-dependent screen or test to look for the presence of breast cancer actually can add efficiency to the detection process. It can also really work to help these women who either aren't qualifying for mammograms or have dense tissue, so that there may be a challenge with a mammogram. And there's also, a lot of women who qualify for mammography-based screening but elect not to go there. So they just don't screen with mammograms. So creating a molecular assay that comes in creates another type of test that can be used, and it actually can complement the imaging and help make that whole process more efficient.
Awesome. Sorry if you heard a dog bark. I think we're all used to kind of these moments in today's life. Thanks so much for that, Bob. Now, this week has been really exciting because there's been a special announcement. So we now know that there is an opportunity for a better solution for diagnostics for breast cancer. What was the announcement this week that's so exciting for anybody who wants to access this?
Yeah, so one of the challenges we've had being a new type of test, a molecular test, is that there are a few things you have to do in order to get the word out and to start making folks aware that it's available and can be used. And really that's around education and access. So we have been working on these things now for a couple of years to make sure that, the way that we present our test is accessible to both patients and physicians. So all that information has been developed and it can be found on our website. But then building out the logistical networks is a whole other step. So this week's announcement was really about a collaboration that we've created with a nationwide entity called Alio Health. And Alio Health has now been purchased by a company called Calian. And Calian is bringing Alio into that family. So now we have access to healthcare providers right across Canada. And these providers through Alio Calian are nurses that can visit workplaces or homes for women who would like to take the test, take the samples, and then get the samples shipped back to our lab here in Calgary. So what we've effectively done through this collaboration is now make the test available to women in 100 communities, just over 100 communities right across Canada. So now we've gone from sort of a small business here based in Calgary with a local network to a small business or in a growing business here based in Calgary with a nationwide network. So we really are are thrilled to be able to describe this partnership and to have this launch officially this week. And it's now time to start getting the word out and making sure that women right across the country realize that this test is available for them, and we're happy to support their healthcare journey using it.
Wow, huge congratulations again. And I hope you took a moment to celebrate, even though I know it's back to, running hard and making sure that this gets out as quickly and to as many people as possible.
Yes, and I'll just add, if you visit our website now, no matter where you are in Canada, you can enter your province, your city, your postal code, and our system will actually tell you what the providers that are available in your area are, and then provide further instructions if you're interested in accessing the test on how to do that.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And at a high level, what kind of impact is this going to make? We can now detect it earlier. People have more accessibility to this test. What do you see in our future?
So that's a really good question. What we would like to see is molecular testing to become more associated with the standard of care. Now, certainly that's a process that is going to take some time to achieve. But having it available and kind of being able to get that feedback and to understand who's using it, what the motivation for using it is, and how quickly the word spreads and how quickly the uptake actually is going to happen it's going to be a fascinating journey. One of the things we're also doing with Calian, because this is a new test, is we're working with them to collect real world evidence on those users and on those use cases so that we can then take that data forward and eventually be able to submit it to the healthcare authorities and begin that process of getting coverage for the test under the provincial public systems.
Wow. So how has this been received and integrated from a clinician's perspective?
So we've really focused on working mostly with family doctors and with clinics that have some focus on women's health. And I would say that experience has been very positive. We've also had a lot of engagement with individual patients who have contacted us directly and said, I really want to take this test. Can you help me get a requisition, get it to my doctor, and then help me figure out how to get those samples taken? Now, all the logistical parts have gotten a lot easier in the last couple of months. But we are, conducting active campaigns to engage with physicians and physician groups to make sure that they are aware of the test and then understand sort of the path that we've taken to get it to where it is, as well as the evidence for using it. Now, not everyone is going to qualify as a patient for the test, and that's a physician and patient-based decision.
Okay.
We provide the guidelines that we've used through our clinical studies and sort of the groups that we've included in our data packages. But for the most part, I think most of the folks who have wanted to use the test have been successful in working with their physician to integrate it into their healthcare path and to be able to use the test. And there are a lot of different use cases for this. So we can drill into some of those if that's of interest. But because it's early days, we're as a company still working with the clinical community to figure out, where we provide the most value, and certainly engaging with clinicians and clinical networks is an important part of collecting that information and helping us be able to answer those questions about where do we have the largest impact down the line.
Love that. And I think that kind of leads into an audience question that I saw pop up about how does the rural communities access this test?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, how do the rural communities access this?
Rural communities.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've had a number of folks from rural communities want to use the test. And up until 10 days ago, you needed to drive into a population center where we had an ability to collect a sample. I think with now the onboarding of two groups, so Alio Calian is one of them. The other is Life Labs. Now we have more capability in smaller places. It may be true that, for more rural places, you would still need to drive somewhere else in order to get the sample drawn, but you're not going to have to drive as far as you would have, back in April. So we're continuing to improve the coverage that we have in different communities across Canada. And I think as we go through the next year, we'll see that access improve more. But we're really happy kind of with where we are now, because I think the majority of the Canadian population is going to be within, an hour's drive of somewhere where they can actually get a sample taken and shipped off to us.
Now I have a question that it came from the audience, but I also want to know personally, because I'm a 36-year-old woman. Obviously, unfortunately, the chances of me knowing other people who've had breast cancer, colleagues, friends, are really high. And I happen to know a couple people. And one of the scary parts about having breast cancer is actually after you recover, go through the surgery, and then you're like, well, now what's the monitoring? I'm scared. I want to make sure I stay on top of it. So can this test be effective for recurrence of breast cancer?
So the answer is we haven't studied that question particularly.
Okay.
So that is one of the things that we're working on doing. So right now, we have no data from women who are survivors.
Okay.
So we're addressing that in the go forward. I believe if a clinician would look at the information from our website with all of our study data, study design, and consult with that patient and understand that limitation that, Syantra hasn't studied your particular situation specifically, but there may be a benefit in taking the test. Just understanding that as that result comes back, there may be some additional follow-up that needs to be done. That is a decision that can be made by the patient and the clinician. And with the requisition from the clinician, we can process that test and return a result. So I hope to be able to address that with a particular set of data in in a year or two down the line. But there isn't a reason why a patient can't take our test. It's just that we have to let them know that we haven't studied that particular situation at this point.
And so which patients or what population group would be the most ideal candidates for this test?
So I think where we have the strongest evidence at the moment is really in younger patients and patients with dense breast tissue. And we like to say that's a population that we can serve where there aren't currently good tools. So I think that's where Syantra has a large impact. Now, that said, we've had a number of women over 50 use the test and use it successfully. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of different use cases. So we're even having women who have had an abnormal mammogram and are now in secondary care and maybe even scheduled for a biopsy want to use the test. And in that case, this molecular data is a supplement to the imaging data, and it goes into that package that the clinician has access to as they make decisions about what next steps for those patients are. So we're not by any means limited to a particular group in terms of age or tissue density, but in those younger women and women with dense tissue, I think, the impact of Syantra may be a bit higher in the earlier days of now having the test available on the market.
So knowing you, Bob, and co-founder Tina Rinker, it's of no surprise that you are charging forward and you really are leaders in changing the landscape of the Canadian healthcare. How do you think that your company is impacting the healthcare system, at that high level?
Yes. So complicated question. But where we are today is, we have our College of Physicians and Surgeons laboratory accreditation. So for a test like Syantra, where we're providing a service, so a sample will come to our lab, we actually manage the sample, analyze the sample, and then return the result. The regulatory structure for that is actually under the provincial authority, and in Alberta, that's the College of Physicians and Surgeons. So we are a listed provider with AHS, and we can accept samples as long as there's a physician's requisition, and it can come from any province in Canada. So that's the beginnings of now getting these kinds of molecular tests onto the market and providing access to patients. I think as we go through time, what we'll see is, the indications, as we have discussed, will begin to become a bit broader, and we'll be able to have more particular data for different groups of women. So that will mean that the appeal of the test will continue to grow. But we're sort of an early entrant in this. We are actually, I believe, one of the very first blood tests to detect breast cancer that performs really well in early stage cancers to come on the market. So as we work with health authorities and as we increase our data packages, and really that real world evidence bit is going to be quite important as we demonstrate, the effectiveness of the test in the population, and who's using it and what the demand is, and how we are doing over the long term. That's really going to cement, I think, these kinds of tests within the healthcare system. And then, different jurisdictions talk to one another. So as we work in the US and as we work in Europe, I think lessons learned there are also going to come back. And what we'll see is that, access improves and other molecular assays probably come online. And so this becomes a pretty common way to look at your health situation, in the next 5 years.
Oh, it's so neat. And we've been talking a lot about Canada. I mean, your first test is available now in over 100 cities across the country. But what about beyond Canada? What are your plans for Syantra with your first test, potentially future tests, and beyond Canada?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We were very close to being able to come to market pre-COVID or co-COVID. And what we ended up having to do was pull back a little bit and really focus on the Canadian market, and in particular the Western Canadian market, as a first step. So what we look like today is a little different than what we thought we would look like before COVID. However, that said, now that COVID is easing and we have more data and more capability, we really see a way to kind of take the Syantra test, put it into a kit, and at least in jurisdictions outside of Canada at the moment, be able to sell that kit to existing labs. So right now we're providing the service in Canada. Once we put the test in a box and we're able to provide it to other labs, we don't need to provide the service. We can allow existing labs to do that. And in that way, we see a way to scale access to the test quite rapidly, and the scale could actually be quite large. So really what we want to do is kind of have a mechanism to deliver the test in a way that's going to impact as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. So that's what we're working on, particularly for the European markets and other jurisdictions that will look at a CE mark as an initial regulatory approval. And the US is in that group, although the situation there is a little more complicated. So I think you'll see our test in Europe and in other countries outside of Canada a little bit ahead of when we are able to address the US market. But it's all coming, and we'll see kind of how that ends up going, because the regulatory regime in most places is evolving. So we're staying abreast of that and working with those authorities. But really, being able to have Life Labs or Dynacare or one of the providers in Canada and LabCorp or Quest in the US provide the test directly is ultimately where we want to go.
Thank you. And we're talking at a high level of where Syantra is going, all of the possibilities. But do you mind taking me into the entrepreneurial perspective? Take me into life of Bob, just even over the next 2 months. What does that look like? What are some of the biggest challenges that you foresee, or biggest opportunities that you have ahead of you, just in the short term?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, funding is an important aspect of that. So we completed a Series A round of funding just at the end of 2021. That's allowed us some runway, but now we need to scale, and we've got to scale on a few different fronts. So additional financing is an important part of what we're going to be doing over the next little while. Also making sure that we're expanding our clinical studies into additional groups, as we've discussed. And building out those distribution networks. I think that's a really key piece. Now, a little closer to home, Syantra is still a startup, so we actually have to hire a good bit. So we're now actively recruiting for a few different positions. And I think, also, what that regulatory regime looks like. I mean, being pretty strategic about that and being engaged with the different regulatory authorities is going to be a big part of what we do. So it's really kind of growing on a lot of different fronts is what we're looking at, and making, you want to make the best decision that you can. It may not be the right decision, and you find that out a little bit down the line. So being able to pivot, I think, is also an important thing. So being able to kind of say, all right, well, if we get into this bit and we find that we need to do something a little bit differently, making sure you're not locked in and that you have that flexibility. So it's really taking a holistic view of your business, where you need to go, how you expect to grow, and and making sure that you're staffed up in a way to support that really is where we're at. And I got to say, Crystal, like the entrepreneurial support community here in the Calgary ecosystem, particularly through the group affiliated with Creative Destruction Labs and the private investment, and I know what you guys are doing in Thin Air Labs is really key to enabling all this. So really, we've been able to take advantage of that, and it's changed so much in the last 5 years, as I know you know. We really just want to remain an Alberta-based company, and hopefully we're able to show sort of those who are coming behind us what biotech and healthcare companies that are committed to Alberta can achieve here at home. Because really, like growing that community here in Calgary and Alberta is a big opportunity for us economically. And it's, I think we saw this story yesterday from the Economist Intelligence Unit saying Calgary is like number, I think it was 3 or 4 in the world for best places to live. I mean, it's like, here we go.
No kidding. And it's honestly from, if I put my Thin Air Labs hat on, it's an honor to have you and Syantra in our portfolio. You have a whole army of support beyond just the Syantra and the Biohub community. You really are a leader, one of the darlings of the life sciences companies in Alberta, and helping inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs and founders that are coming up. So huge congratulations to the big announcement this week, all of your successes after decades of work on this project, and of course with all of the successes that you are yet to achieve in the short and long term. And again, really appreciate your time today as well.
Oh, thank you. It was fun. Open to do it again sometime.
Yeah, you bet. Have a great day, everybody, and happy Friday.